Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first sustainability discussion that we will be webinar that we are holding as part of the Sustainable Supply Chain Group of UNGC Network Sri Lanka. My name is Thamindri De Silva, and I'm joined by a wonderful panel with a lot of experience and very diverse knowledge. I warmly welcome Elena Onea, Matt Kovac, Sonali Pires, and our keynote speaker, Dilhan C. Fernando, to today's panel. Hello, everyone. Y'all are welcome to please enter any questions you may have throughout the session that we will be holding. And what I would kindly request of you is that we save all our questions, which will be followed up as part of the QA session after our speakers go through. Before I start, I want to give a brief definition of what supply chain sustainability is about, so that we're all on the same page. I know there are several definitions that go out. The supply chain sustainability is the management of environmental, social, and economic impacts, and the encouragement of good governance practices throughout the life cycles of goods and services. The object of supply chain sustainability is to create, protect, and grow long-term environmental, social, and economic value for all stakeholders involved in bringing products and services to market. When it comes to the UN Global Compact's guiding principles, sustainable supply chain practice is a cross-cutting theme, and it is incorporated in every single principle. By integrating the UN Global Compact principles into supply chain relationships, companies advance corporate sustainability and promote broader sustainable development objectives. Now, this will be, the companies that are representative and the individuals will give you the big picture on both ethical sourcing as well as sustainable supply chain practices. But as part of that, we will also be having a key feature of how small and micro enterprises can also enter this game and also the competitive advantages that come out of it. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Dilhan C. Fernando, who is the CEO of Dilma Tea and the chairman of the UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, to say a few words. Dilhan is also the director of the Dilma School of Tea. His responsibilities in tea are numerous, but he also manages the humanitarian and environmental arms of Dilma. These are the fulfillment of his family's commitment to making business a matter of human service. And both the Dilma MJF Charitable Foundation and Dilma Conservation utilize revenue from global sales of Dilma in implementing humanitarian and conservation projects in Sri Lanka. We are privileged to have Dilhan, and over to you, Dilhan.
Thank you, Thamindri. Thank you, colleagues, Matt, Helena. Thank you, Sonali, for being present. And thank you, participants. So, my introduction necessarily needs to be brief because talking on the importance of ethical sourcing is something of a foregone conclusion. But I would like to share some thoughts as a framework to what we are about to hear from our speakers. So, we need to understand the context of our supply chains today when we really talk about transformation and the necessity for it. Our global supply chain essentially is formed around the need to access lowest cost production. This is a reality. We've seen that happening over the last 20 years, accelerating after 2008, after the crisis that we witnessed at the time. But what that has created is it has externalized significant aspects of the human condition. It has also externalized many environmental and related phenomena, creating the situation that we see today. Now, why have this discussion at this point? Well, COVID-19 has challenged every aspect of business. I don't need to tell you that. But what lies beyond and what COVID-19 has done in magnifying the social and environmental dimensions of our existence is hard to comprehend. But of course, we see it happening around us. And so that is probably the motivation for looking at some form of transformation. We have a history that was predicated on fundamentally different principles, but we have a future where we can choose the beneficial, positive path, or we can choose business as usual. Now, the context of that, firstly, is defining a simple principle. I'm a business person, and I'm talking to you as a person who believes in capitalism. I'm not suggesting that we overthrow the system. I know there are some who would, but we must remember a simple principle, that capitalism involves the creation of value. And that means social value as well as environmental value. And there are no conditions under which capitalism could allow the creation of one at the expense of the others. So at the creation of economic value at the expense of natural and social value. And so within that framework, a few thoughts. Where we are right now, we have the Aichi targets relating to biodiversity. We have failed to achieve every single one of them. Some partially, but generally we have failed to achieve every single one of them. So if you look at the proposition of the UN's Human Development Report, which is incredibly insightful, please read the summary if you get a chance. They ask a very important question. Do we choose to strike out on bold new paths, striving to continue human development while easing planetary pressures? Or do we choose to try and ultimately fail to go back to business as usual and be swept into a dangerous unknown? So I think many of you have read the metaphor of COVID as some sort of portal into a different era. And a portal it is, because when you talk of supply chain sustainability, the tools that this incredibly difficult period has given us are formidable. We have seen the acceleration of global collaboration. We are looking at the most challenging supply chain event with the distribution of vaccine. But also, we've seen unprecedented cooperation connected to what we now realize is an interdependence amongst economies, simply because of the nature of the supply chain that evolved, looking for the cheapest labor, looking for the cheapest product. But we've also seen an acceleration of technology. And I'm sure every one of you have seen in the past 12 months the potential for transformation delivered by this combination of collaboration and the enabling and empowering capability that technology gives us. And so my suggestion would be that whether it is for a moral or a business, or if it is for an environmental consideration, we need to really take the first of the two options that the UN 2020 Human Development report suggests. And the fact is that our own actions proven to be destabilizing the systems on which we are dependent. Our life support system, I think you have heard many people talking about that. But the fact is that the strain on the earth is amplified by what's happening right now. And I think some of you may also have seen the 3 waves that is fronted by COVID and followed by the social and environmental waves, much bigger, which are projected by economists, environmentalists, and others. So the important principle, I think, in the discussion that we are having is twofold. When you consider the environment, it's often considered that human development should be at the expense of the environment. But I think that more than ever before, and the solutions were presented in 2005 in Lord Stern's report, more than ever before, it has become evident that protecting the environment and the coexistence of environment and human development doesn't need to be at the expense of each other. And what we can see today is that when you take the consumer pressure, the pressure from the market, the most important factor in any business, and take the regulatory pressure, essential again in any business, there is no other way forward other than compliance, at least forward in terms of going to a positive and a sustainable future. And so when you look at that opportunity, consider also the fact that we have the wonderful Earth Day declarations. It was a great occasion when 40 global leaders came together and made wonderful declarations. But it's not a fait accompli. It is not a done deal. So now the work starts, because we don't want to end up saying, look, there were great words back in 2021 on Earth Day, but here we are in 2030 and we haven't achieved it. We don't want the same as what happened in Aichi to happen again. And so, and why, to add to that, why we don't want it to happen is that this time around, we can't afford to let the words ring hollow and say, sorry, we made a mistake, because our future generations, and in fact, our own existence is threatened by what we have right now. And sustainable supply chains are as critical as in the case of its impact of the environment, simply because if you look at a moral argument, or you look at the social argument, the possibility for us as businesses to impact on the lives of people at the bottom of the pyramid is formidable. I know we have to perhaps add a few extra resources. We need to hold the hands, we need to mentor smallholders, we need to mentor small packaging solutions providers. There are so many different opportunities, but the single defining point there is that business can no longer follow Friedman's proposition of saying that the social responsibility of business is to make profit. It's not. And today we see that more starkly than ever. So with all the lofty proclamations of our global political leaders, we still need to come to a point where the words are met with some form of action, and the action is in us. And so my suggestion is that yes, the moral argument is strong, but the moral argument has failed us in the past. There is a very strong and compelling consumer argument, a commercial proposition. Nature doesn't need to compromise commercial benefit, because today you've seen in other sectors, the green economy and the opportunity that it offers for sustainable growth of so many economies. We have seen China embrace the green economy, renewables, different forms of more climate resilient and sustainable forms of agriculture, and so on. And so in context of the expectation that the planet, and quote, continues its trajectory into what some have dubbed the sixth mass extinction, and understanding that diversity of life on Earth is at risk in context of our failure to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets, my request is, we don't need to preach to each other, we don't need to posture, we need to simply understand that there is an existential threat. But we also need to understand that the solution in addressing that threat, while our businesses coexist with the solution, is already set out. It's quite clear. But more than that, as businesses, it's fantastic to be successful. You have more zeros in the bank. But the opportunity to go beyond success to significance by saying, look, I've mentored and I've brought so many packaging suppliers, I've helped them to transform their model. We have, I can tell you that we as a business, we are surrounded by thousands of suppliers who simply don't understand. What do we do with materials? What do we do with this? We don't have solutions to this. In many cases, the solutions are simply at the end of a keyboard on the internet. And so our role as businesses to mentor, support, strengthen each of these smaller businesses, small entrepreneurs, ultimately who are going to move the needle, is phenomenal. Because what that can do is, where agriculture is concerned, it can strengthen the rural economy. it can, by building that market alignment, by building that sustainability, it can create a front line against deforestation, a front line against unsustainable climate practices, create a front line against social inequality. And that's important because ultimately social inequality destabilizes economies and countries, and that's not good for business in any sense. So I think the numbers, I'm not going to quote you any more numbers because I think everybody understands, but I think what I do want to end with is to explain that human actions have produced a situation that needs to change for the sake of future generations. Our supply chains are designed around an objective that is no longer relevant. I'm not saying it's easy because we are still, all of us, and I can tell you from our own experience, us as much as any of you, we are all victims to a discount culture because ultimately selling a product in a market requires collaboration with retailers, hospitality operators who demand in many cases a low price. But there are solutions, there are ways around it, the concept of true pricing, education, advocacy, and so many ways. But the bottom line is that even if the solutions aren't evident today, by collaborating, by using technology, we will have to find them, we will find them. And what's at stake is our survival, the survival of our businesses and each of us. So with that, I think I'm more interested in hearing what my colleagues today on the panel have to say. So with appreciation to each of you for joining us and to our panelists, I would like to end there and hand back to you, Thamindri. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilhan. We'll move right along to Matt Kovac, who is the Executive Director of Food Industry Asia from Singapore. Matt's role is to deliver impactful policy outcomes in nutrition, food safety, and regional trade across Asia through the establishment of multi-stakeholder platforms, public-private partnerships, and capacity building and training. As part of its work, FIAs cuts across the connected areas of smart regulation and safe food, health, nutrition, and innovation, as well as sustainable and resilient supply chains. Matt, we're very pleased that you accepted our invitation. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening to everyone, or afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, of course. It's my pleasure to contribute to this panel. So thank you very much. I don't have any slides, so maybe I'll just sort of take 10 minutes or so just to talk through a few areas that I think are important and hopefully set us up for a discussion afterwards. So perhaps, and Dilhan has already mentioned a few of these things, but perhaps maybe what I want to say is start off with sort of, why ethical sourcing is important to business, and in particular to agri-food companies as well. And so we know that ethical sourcing really is a sustainable, responsible approach to supply chain management and sourcing. For some companies it's a given, but for others it's a relatively new concept still, sadly. But by ensuring that all products are acquired in a really fair way, meaning that workers are paid a fair wage, that human rights are respected, that factories are safe, and that communities that are impacted by sourcing are treated fairly and respectfully, ethical sourcing reinforces that social environmental responsibility. But I have to say that the term ethics does continue to evolve. Certainly the way that we viewed ethics back in the 20th century, the 19th century, look where we are today. And it's not just a matter of just checking a single box. Instead, the phrase really represents the culmination of several coordinated efforts, suggesting that an organization is committed to enforcing sustainability as well as social responsibility and awareness. Okay, so there are cynics, and some might have dismissed sustainability and responsibility as catchy buzzwords, but I think that's changed significantly over the last few years, and even on the end of the byproduct of COVID, even though we're still within COVID, if you look at what the European Union is trying to do around sustainability in general and the investment they're making, it's extraordinary. And so really, ethical sourcing and sustainability are things that can really sort of help you with your risk mitigation strategies as well. And holding your organization and your various partners to a very high standard isn't just good ethics, it's good business. And I'm probably going to talk a little bit about that later. So organizations that do engage in unethical sourcing, let's say, they really are going to be significantly more vulnerable to a host of reputational and financial risk factors. And in particular, if they're publicly listed companies, of course, as well. But for those publicly listed and even private family-owned businesses, there will be greater sort of investor pressure through ESG, and even some of the biggest family-owned companies in the world, companies like Mars and Cargill, which we represent. They're maybe family-owned, but there's investors there as well, and they're very, very focused on ESG. So those companies really should be sending their suppliers a very consistent message that economic, social, and environmental requirements are all important. They should make the same message clear to their procurement officials and create incentives for them to pursue not only economic goals, but also environmental and social goals too. Now, those procurement folks have been rather busy of late, and anyone working within supply chain due to COVID-19 knows as well. And they should be taking a really hands-on approach to collecting data about their suppliers' capacity, the monitoring indicators of their sustainability performance, and engaging with them in a continuous improvement projects. Now, many of the multinationals, and those are primarily the companies that we work with, should also be really directly working with their suppliers procurement units on the best ways to disseminate sort of general sustainability requirements. And when I refer to sustainability, folks, I also mean ethical sourcing and ESG within that, and sort of the broad term there, and through their supplier networks. Now, the danger of not acting is very clear, and I think Dilhan mentioned this as well. A supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And this really is an absolute human necessity that we do address the sustainability issues as well as ethical sourcing as well. So let's get into more about the business case, perhaps, on ethical sourcing and supply chains. What I want to talk about is really a little bit generally about companies first, and the ones that really generate value from their sustainability and ESG programs. Okay, so these type of companies, and this is not exclusive to the agri-food sector. These are, in general, some companies across all sectors that really look at value creation. They really do follow a distinctive set of management practices. They're more likely than others to make ESG and sustainability a strategic priority, and to set out specific aspirations and targets. Okay, and that value creating those value creating companies are more likely than others to make ESG, and sustainability an element of their corporate culture as well. And that means actually training employees on how to behave. And we have examples of that. And Dilmati is one, of course, as is Unilever, I think. And in even companies like Patagonia, which is an apparel company as well. It's extraordinary what they do. And how they integrate that sustainability into their daily work. And so it's like a muscle, it's you flex it a lot, you get used to it, you keep using it. And that would apply to supply chains and how they source as well. Now, value creating companies are more apt at kind of engaging customers and business partners in their ESG and sustainability agendas, and so these type of companies they collaborate with their customers and suppliers on addressing those specific issues around ethics or ESG or whatever they are, and to some degree they even adjust product portfolios to be more sustainable. Some more than others, and then they account for those ethical and sustainable factors when selecting their and evaluating their suppliers. So to catch up with those real value creating companies, other companies really need to understand which practices are most closely linked with positive financial impact. So these value creators exhibit a strategic, purposeful approach that really differs from all the other companies. And that happens in many ways. But one clear one, for example, would be how a company CEO makes sustainability a priority as a strategic agenda. And obviously examples that I would say from the food and agri industry right now are companies like Danone and Nestle, Unilever, Mondelez is to a certain extent as well. And of course, Dilmati and the work that Dilhan does is quite incredible. So the motives for engaging on ESG and ethical sourcing and sustainability really do matter. We know that, okay? But those value creators are significantly more likely to say their organizations address these issues and topics to fulfill their organizational purpose. And certainly someone with teenage daughters as well, purpose, I think for them is significantly more important at their stage, you know, where they and what they want to study and what they want to do than when I was that age. It is really very different. There's a massive generational difference there. And so that organizational purpose means aligning with goals and the missions and the values, and you make that much more tangible and have that positive impact. Okay. So other types of companies, though, perhaps are more likely to say that these organizations are addressing sustainability for other reasons, and such as maybe to meet industry norms or standards, or just to conform with regulatory requirements. And that would be really sad and a missed opportunity. I know that it's not like we all sing Kumbaya and all the companies do it, but there is a real necessity for the planet, right? But when it comes to that big picture on ESG and sustainability, you're going to see many companies that just do it for compliance. Is that enough? Well, that's a start for sure. But really embedding that in company purpose is really important in the future. And so just a few things off on the business case. Look, we know it can, looking at things around ESG, sustainability, and even ethical sourcing can really mitigate your supply chain risk. Okay. There's some research from BSR, which is a sustainability consultancy, and it says by 2030, productivity losses related to heat-related workplace disruption and injuries could rise above $2 trillion. I don't know whether I believe that $2 trillion, but it was a number that really sort of grabbed my attention. Perhaps that was the purpose of it. But even if it's not even 2 trillion, it's 1 trillion. That's still significant. It's very significant. Now, and BSR also noted in this research that there are several countries that have actually introduced legislation that tackle forced labor in supply chains. And what happened is this actually disrupted some of those supply chains where companies have been unable to assure the avoidance of forced labor in their production of their goods. Okay, so that was very interesting. I think another area would be you can actually save money through improved resource efficiencies as well. An example would be the Carbon Disclosure Project. It's what was it called? Sorry, the supply chain program that says that 99 participating companies save 19 billion while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You can eliminate supply chain inefficiencies, of course. That's another way of doing it. You can drive more innovation in which is absolutely essential when we're talking about ESG. You can potentially gain better access to financing. So across ESG, sustainability, and ethical sourcing. So those kind of practices potentially can translate into better and cheaper access to capital. So 90% of the studies on the cost of capital show that sound sustainability standards lower the cost of capital for companies. And investors are challenging companies on everything around sustainability and ESG, climate disclosure, deforestation, antibiotics in animals, and labor rights. And we're going to see those they're not even activist investors, just investors are going to be significantly more aggressive in the future. And we're seeing that play out already with many of the big multinationals and what's happening now. And I think obviously, Dylan mentioned this as well, as did I earlier, you know, maintaining your market competitiveness in the future, which is why you see companies like Dilma, UT, and companies like Nestle, and companies like Unilever and Danone really making those efforts. They see the benefit of, I'm sorry, can you hear me? Yes, the mic went out. You can still see the benefit of doing that long-term in terms of competitive advantage, okay? One other area I might want to quickly address is on transparency as well, and how that might relate a bit. So the concept of supply chain transparency is significantly more important than what it was 10 years ago. And in fact, more than 10 years ago, it probably wasn't even talked about. And it really does command the attention of mid and senior level managers across all industries, and obviously within the agri-food industry too. Now, the reasons for this increased interest are very, very clear. Companies, like I said, are under pressure, not just from investors, but governments, consumers, NGOs, you know, everyone. And they're asking to have companies divulge much more information about their supply chains, and the reputational cost of failing to meet those demands could be quite high. So, for example, food companies are facing more demand for supply chain related information about ingredients, and in particular around things around food fraud and even animal welfare. And that's also in Asia as well, and sadly, child labor. And there are some supply chains where there are still massive issues, not just for children, but for adults too. Less clear though, however, is how to define sort of transparency in a supply chain context and the extent to which companies should then pursue it. And so I was looking at this, and I looked at this MIT study that mapped out the definitions of supply chain transparency. And you'd think it was quite clear, but it's not. And that one related to labor practices in the apparel industry, and it found huge differences in definitions across organizations, which was actually a surprise to be frank. So what is clear is that the supply chain transparency requires companies to know what is happening upstream in the supply chain, and then how to communicate that both internally and externally, obviously, right? Now, one reason the process has become increasingly important is that is because of consumers. Researchers at MIT Sloan School of Management found that consumers were perhaps willing to pay anywhere between 2% to 10% more for products from companies that provide more supply chain transparency. Okay, and in that study, consumers valued the information about the treatment of workers in a product supply chain, and the seller's efforts to improve working conditions, which I thought was fascinating. And across industries, this growing segment of very discerning consumers, I wouldn't say it's huge now, but it could be even bigger. They really seek information on product ingredients and materials, where it comes from, where it's sourced, and even up to you've seen some news that says some companies can even identify which cow your milk comes from. I don't know whether I believe that yet or not, though. So as these demands have increased, so has the reputational risk, though, and obviously from media and NGOs over the last 10 years. Okay, and there is a big impact on your reputation too. So what I would say is that transparency should really be go beyond gaining visibility into your extended supply chain, right? And it's the process by which a company really takes action on the insights gained through that greater visibility. It's not enough just to know what's going on. And obviously companies making the right decisions and saying that we want to source more ethically as well, and igniting that type of behavior. And I think another area as well is how transparency can actually be measured. So I think it was Harvard Business School did some work on this, and they created 2 dimensions. One is supply chain scope. That's the depth of interaction in the supply chain, from internal operations, direct, indirect suppliers, and all the way through to raw materials. And then on the second dimension, it was the milestones. So things like code of conduct, then standards and certification, performance-based metrics, traceability, and the ultimate goal, which is full disclosure. I mentioned this company earlier, and I know it's not a food and agri company, but it's one that is very impressive. And Patagonia is a full disclosure company. This apparel company that makes the clothes and things. And it maps an actual subset of its raw materials, the mills, the factories that make all of the Patagonia products, and it even drills down to about the vendors' operations and their staff. And I think that's absolutely extraordinary, and that really is at the pinnacle. Interestingly, smaller food companies are also emerging as some leading edge innovators in this, in how they're measuring and showing it. So there's a company called 1 Degree Organic Foods that makes cereal products. That's fully traceable from farm to spoon. Sorry, yes, cereal spoon. And Red's Best Seafood Products, seafood company, traceable from the fishing vessel through QR codes on the company's packaging. And I think those are 2 great examples. You see what some of the big companies doing, but those small companies are very nimble indeed. And obviously some of them don't have the legacies of bigger companies and their supply chains. Okay, so finally, let's go back a little bit to the consumers. So and what they're saying, why it's so important to them. That level of transparency really is because of consumers becoming much more interested. Okay, and it's not just about how things are sourced and supply chains, but it's all related to health as well. And I think last year with COVID-19, what our research also showed in many parts of Asia is that people were much more concerned about their health and what type of ingredients, how it was produced, and things around even how do you boost your own immunity. So there is a lot more interest in food companies and their supply chains. Social media, traditional media channels as well, of course, they deliver streams of consumer concerns about labor practices, climate change. Every day we see that, and that's important too. That keeps private sector on its toes and it keeps it honest. And to be honest as well, look, supply chains kind of existed within a more kind of a hidden framework. I don't think it was deliberate, but I think in the past companies always saw it as it's our competitive advantage. It still is, right? Let's not think that it isn't. And one thing from my personally an anecdote is I know that supply chains are important when my 79-year-old mother says to me, starts talking to me about COVID and supply chains and how important things are and how she couldn't get things in the supermarket. So if my mother started to take notice of supply chains at her age, then yes, this is really starting to resonate. I mean, obviously COVID sort of pushed her to understand what was going on because she couldn't get some of her local products in the supermarket. Also big data as well, great shifts and creating transparency. And we see this in the tech world, you know, and of course, but with that comes more scrutiny and you have to be seriously prepared for that. So finally, sorry if I took a bit longer. Data from the research group Nielsen shows that 2/3 of consumers globally are actually willing to spend more on a product if it comes from what they would consider a more sustainable brand. Okay, consumers are fickle though sometimes, and I just want to put caveat emptor there, is that sometimes what they say is not the same as what they do. Okay, we know that, but millennials, as they continue to grow and represent a larger portion of the buying power, you know, maybe there's a bit of a shift and transfer away from baby boomers, although baby boomers certainly have a lot more disposable and discretionary income. You know, that trend might keep growing. So 73% of millennials are now willing to spend more, and 81% of them they're on their favorite company, and in particular if that company is making significant declarations on issues related to ESG, ethical sourcing, and corporate social responsibility. And with that, thank you very much for listening to me. I'm sorry if I went over a little bit of time, and I look forward to the discussion a bit later.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to introduce you now to Elena Orea, who is the Sustainability Development Manager at Bolton Food. Bolton Food is part of the Bolton Group, and it has it is present in 5 continents, in over 46 countries, and has a number of products that are out in the market, particularly around tuna. It is an Italian multinational company, and Elena is responsible for the people part of the sustainability strategy, which includes quality, taste, innovation, and sustainability. Elena, welcome to the conversation. The floor is yours. You're still on mute, Elena.
Yeah, I'm still on mute. I'm trying to share my screen to share my presentation. Can you see it? Okay, can you see the complete PPT?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank you the invitation. It's a pleasure for Bolton Food and also for me to be here with you today talking about this important topic, which is also a global issue in our sector, as Matt said before. It was a really nice remark, Mark and Fernando. I will have the opportunity to, with this PPT, to share with you how Bolton Food, a tuna leader company, is transforming its supply chain into a more sustainable one. So just a few words about who we are. Bolton Food is the food business unit of the Italian multinational Bolton Group, with revenues in excess of 1 billion euros, about 3,800 employees around the world. We are present in 60 countries in every continent, with 11 iconic brands like Rio Mare in Italy, but also with some important presence in some European countries. Also Sopiquet in France, also in Germany, and Isabel in Spain, and which is a very, very strong brand also in Latin America. Our sustainable strategy is a very solid one. integrated throughout the whole business and also every department in the company, and divided into 3 pillars that you can see here. Sourcing of the sustainable procurement and use of natural resources and raw material. Of course, our main raw material is tuna, so we adopt and promote sustainable fishing. Production, we try to produce in low impact factories, and also people, for the well-being of our people, and also supporting the communities where we are present and the communities where we source from. But which is our ambition and our approach to sustainability? We think that being a leader in the sector, we have very clear that it's our responsibility to become a point of reference in our industry when it comes to sustainability. We want to be the most sustainable tuna company for the world, and here you have our claim: best fish, healthy oceans, better life. I think it's a very consistent claim with our strategy that I will explain in a minute. However, we know, and I would like to stress that for us, the road to sustainability cannot be traveled alone. So, which is then our approach? How do we work in Bolton Food? Well, we always work adopting a strategic, global, scientific, and multi-stakeholder approach. So we think that, we believe that fishing sustainability should be addressed always with a scientific, global, strategic, multi-stakeholder approach oriented towards the creation of shared value with our partners, and also believing that it's fundamental to have strong and credible partners from whom we can learn a way of working, and also to adopt clear and transparent goals, KPIs, and roadmaps. So we think, in summary, that we believe that partnership is our leadership, and this is a kind of mantra that we have in our company, and this is the mantra which leads all our sustainable strategy. We have to take into account that tuna is one of the most important fishing resources in the world, if not the most important, and that the tuna supply chain is one of the longest and most complex of the food sector. We have tuna fishing, the processing of loins, also the cleaning of the raw fish, the canning, and also the logistics, with important social and environmental impacts that we have to take care of. In terms of environmental impact, you could see them in the green square. The fishing activity has an impact, of course, in the oceans and the resources. There are many different fishing methods that we need to assess and to know and to validate. Different type of vessels and fisheries have to be managed in an effective and transparent way. And I'm talking about laws, about regulations. On the other hand, we have also very important impacts in the social, or from the social point of view. We have to take into account that we use massive manual labor. There are multiple players in developing countries with different legal frameworks and cultural models, where human rights sometimes are not enough assured or guaranteed. We have high percentage of female workers in the processing stage, and this is something that we have to take into account. And the risk of human rights violation in fishing operations due to the isolation of the high seas during weeks, months, and unfortunately during years is really, really high. So this is something that we have to take into account, that we have to take care of in our supply chain. So based on our sustainable strategy and according to it, we have to take care of both. So we have to take into account the environmental part, the environmental impact of our activity, and also the social impact of our activity. We strive to have multi-years and cross-countries transformational partnership with the most expert and reputed NGOs on environmental and social aspects. For the environmental sustainability, for the environmental side, for the environmental impact of our activities, We are members of ISSF, and we have a very strong partnership with WWF also. And for the social one, we have signed a very innovative and important agreement with OXFAM that I will explain you in a minute. So according to this sustainable strategy, and as I said before, the sustainable road of the tuna supply chain cannot be traveled alone. We have signed these important agreements with these reputed NGOs. How about our partnership with ISSF? ISSF is the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation. We are among the founding members of ISSF. It's a global non-profit partnership among the industry, the tuna industry. 75% of the tuna industry is involved in this NGO. Also the scientists scope and also WWF International. And its mission is to undertake science-based initiatives for the long-term conservation and sustainable use of tuna stocks that result in the MSC environmental certification for tuna fisheries. MSC certification, I guess that you know it, is this blue label, and is the most important environmental certification in the world, taking into account the status of the stocks, the impact of the fishing activity, and also the transparent management of fisheries, which is very important in our sector. So the main areas of focus of ISSF is to do a stock assessment reports, to investigate bycatch, fat management, fat is a kind of fishing method, also to push observers in vessels, also human and electronic observers, limitation of the fishing capacity, social commitments, which have been recently introduced in the conservation measures of ISSF. So all ISSF members go through an audit every year made by an external body to measure the compliance with these main measures about regarding sustainable practices. And I have to say that we are 100% compliance with all conservation measures of ISSF. The report is public, and you can find it on the ISSF webpage. About our partnership with WWF, we have a strong international partnership covering the 100% of all fish procurement for all Bolton food brands all over the world. Thanks to this partnership, we are achieving important goals to guarantee the transparency to our consumers. And I think that we are playing also an important role to drive the tuna industry into more sustainable practices. This is very important for us because one of our main goals is to drive the tuna industry into more sustainable practice, to demonstrate the tuna sector that it's possible to do it in a sustainable way from the environmental and also the social point of view. Our commitment is with WWF is based on 5 pillars. 100% of our procurement will be coming from MSC or robust fishery improvement projects by 2024. Fishery improvement projects are fisheries about to get the MSC certification. So fisheries with sustainable practices, or at least responsible practices, to guarantee the full transparency and traceability to our consumers, to strengthen our policy on human rights along the entire supply chain, to support the protection of the marine ecosystem and biodiversity, and to promote a positive change in the market and communicate to raise awareness among consumers. This is also linked to transparency and traceability. It's our responsibility as an industry to give transparent information to our consumers about the origin of the products they are buying. So it's our responsibility to let them know what is behind a can of tuna. And this is very clear for us. At this stage, and this is the numbers that we have now, the 70% of our tuna is sourced from robust FIP or MSC certified fisheries. So I think that we are on the right course to achieve this 100% in 2024. About our partnership with OXFAM, this is an agreement that we are really proud of, a very innovative and important one also for the entire tuna industry. You know that OXFAM is one of the most reputed NGOs talking about or working on social aspects and human rights. They are working in more than 70 countries worldwide to eliminate inequality and poverty. They have partnership with most of the most progressive companies around the world. For example, Unilever, Lavazza, Mars, Burberry. And but Bolton Food is the first company in the world to have partnered with OXFAM with a multi-country approach for a 4-year period to raise the standards on human rights with a main goal that is to build increasingly equitable tuna supply chains where inclusion, gender equality, respect for human rights and decent working conditions are guaranteed. So our goal as an industry is to create a new standard of social sustainability and bring a positive change in the market. We want to drive the market into more sustainable practices. The guiding principles of the partnership are these 10 principles. They are the same under the United Nations guideline principles: no exploitation, no child labor, representation and notification of violation. So strong rebound mechanism along the supply chain, internal and also external, healthy and safe work environments, regular contracts and adequate compensation, reasonable working hours, no abuse of human dignity, no discrimination, protection of women and their specific needs. I said before that it's very important for us because the presence of women is really, really big in our sector, and also protection of the rights of local community groups, of course. The main steps that has this partnership with OXFAM. We signed this agreement 1 year ago, and we already did the first part of the agreement, which was to do a desk analysis of corporate policies and related social and corporate policies and codes regarding social and human rights. We did a really deep desk analysis on them. Then the implementation of a human rights impact assessment in 3 key countries in our supply chain, like Ecuador, Morocco, and Indonesia. I will take some minutes after to talk about this. The definition of a monitoring system to verify the respect for human rights, and also the communication of the commitments to positively influence the entire industry. So we want to be a good example for the sector. We want to drive the sector, and as I said also before, let me take just 2 minutes to explain you what is a human rights impact assessment, which is the core business of our agreement with OXFAM. Human rights impact assessment is an old OXFAM methodology, coherent with the best international standards for the United Nations and also for the OECD. And it's a tool to measure the impact of corporate activities on human rights. It's an on-field due diligence assessment of the supply chain, carry out analyzing and interviewing all the key stakeholders along the supply chain. It's done by independent researchers analyzing the role of every stakeholder and player involved in the supply chain, and it enables the understanding of the nature and causes behind the human rights violations. So it identifies appropriate procedures to prevent and remedy risk. We like to say that it is like a doctor approach versus a policeman approach. So the human rights impact assessment is the doctor who wants to understand the root causes of a problem in order to give some remedy. This is why this methodology is so important, because it enables us to understand the root causes of the human rights violations. They might be economic, social, cultural, maybe market reasons, and identify the best ways to put remedies to address and eliminate any negative impact. So this is all from my side, and this is how Bolton Food works. We think that working in partnership with the most relevant actors in the supply chain is really, really important to drive a real change in the sector into more sustainable practice. Thanks.
Thank you, Elena. That was a very good sort of case study on how business really works through this sustainable supply chain and also through ethical sourcing. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to enter it in our Q&A webinar panel. Once we're done with the presentations, we will go into a series of questions and also incorporate your questions into it. Our final but not least panelist is Sonali Pires. She heads up the Sustainability, Enterprise Risk Management and Group Initiatives Division of John Keells Holdings, which is Sri Lanka's largest diversified conglomerate with operations across 7 industry sectors, including leisure, transportation, property, consumer foods, and retail. Sonali joined the John Keells Group in 2010 and has been working in sustainability since 2011. Thank you, Sonali, for joining us. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tamindri. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and share some of JKH's experiences and learnings during our sustainability journey and how we've tried to integrate ethical sourcing and transparency into our sourcing process. Janani, if we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I think you kind of gave us an overview, but John Keells is Sri Lanka's largest conglomerate, and we operate in 7 very diverse business segments, and we employ close to 20,000 people in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. We started our sustainability journey in 2008 with our first standalone sustainability report, and since then we've been implementing and improving and putting in place a robust sustainability management framework that all our businesses operate within. If we could go to the next, please. So just to kind of quickly address why we as a corporate feel that this topic today is so beneficial and relevant to corporates such as ourselves. I think if you look at everybody's concept of sustainability, it's matured now to recognize that it's insufficient to just look at sustainability as something that is contained within the boundary of a business. And it's essential to look at your wider sphere of influence and therefore your supply chain. And it gives businesses the opportunity to promote and influence sustainable practices in their supply chain through environmental practices, through fair labor practices. And as Matt said, hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Sonali.
Sorry, okay. As Matt said, it really is a risk mitigation issue as well. Increasingly, you've seen that how a supply chain can negatively impact the reputation of a business. And in the long term, there is value creation. We're looking at businesses, building mutually beneficial relationships with suppliers, working with suppliers, supporting livelihoods through their sustainable sourcing programs, and therefore also looking at securing supplies for their own operations. And then lastly, again, really trying to meet increasing stakeholder demand for sustainable sourcing and ethical sourcing. There's investors and consumers, they're looking for this. They're also just in terms of well-known sustainability reporting frameworks, this is now a required disclosure. Moving to the next slide. Yeah, so once we started focusing on our supply chain, the goal was really how do we integrate this into our sourcing process. So this slide is just a summary of our approach and how we went about it. So as I said, integrating ethical sourcing into the sourcing process, looking at how we communicate with our suppliers, how we engage with them on an ongoing basis, and then finally looking at assessing and evaluating the performance of our suppliers. So if we move to the next slide, I'll just go into a little bit of detail on each of these areas. So one of the first steps that we took was to incorporate a supplier code of conduct, which is included in all centrally sourced contracts in terms of suppliers signing with the group. And through the supplier code of conduct, our suppliers are made aware of our expectations and given guidance on the key sustainability aspects that they need to look at integrating into their operations. So the code of conduct will have our expectations on their practices with respect to the environment, human rights, fair labor practices, and also ethical business. Moving on, in terms of engagement, the group looks to continuously engage with its suppliers, and our philosophy really has been to work with suppliers, supporting them, creating awareness, sharing best practices. And at the Central Sourcing Division, we would have an annual supplier forum where we pick a topic every year that's relevant to sustainability. We invite our key suppliers, and that's a really good knowledge sharing opportunity where we can get feedback from our suppliers, and that happens on a yearly basis. In terms of our various sectors, they also have a number of different means of engagement with our suppliers, and these can range from technical assistance, advice, training programs, and other forms of general assistance. So, I mean, as I said, this creates mutually beneficial relationships, and at the same time helps to influence our suppliers to improve their business processes. The next pillar of our strategy is then bringing into play transparency by looking at evaluating our suppliers and assessing their performance. Our internal management framework kind of operates on the belief that to understand where you are, you need to also to improve, you need to understand where you are. And we've tried to apply that to our suppliers as well. So we carry out regular assessments to see how they're doing in terms of their sustainability performance. Our sectors would carry out quality audits, general health and safety audits, and has on occasion also engaged third-party assessors to help us in seeing how our supply chain partners are performing. So Central Sourcing would do an annual supplier assessment. This year we did about 89 suppliers through a checklist to see how they are performing on key sustainability parameters. So ranging from their environmental practices to labor practices, health and safety, etc. And these assessments kind of really allow us to then focus and support the suppliers that need to improve their performance. And we do this by offering advice or capacity building and assistance where relevant. We also wanted to, just moving on, we also wanted to briefly touch on the role that technology has played in increasing transparency at JKH. So for the last couple of years, we've been using an online sourcing platform for all centrally sourced items. And this has resulted in streamlining the entire process and ensuring transparency and fair assessment for all our suppliers. So it's kind of end-to-end where suppliers are required to register on the system. And during this process, they also have to include all sustainability related practices. And these are then used during our assessment and evaluation when selecting and awarding contracts to suppliers. And overall, this has resulted in quite significant efficiencies and general positive environmental impacts when you look at water and paper savings and just general commute savings in terms of the suppliers, as it's all done online. Just to sum up, kind of key learnings from our journey thus far when we're looking at implementing supply chain sustainability. First, I think the most important thing is to kind of understand your supply chain, map it out, identify the boundaries that you want to work with, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers, and allow yourself to focus on that boundary. And then move towards developing your internal frameworks and your assessment mechanisms, which will then allow you to identify any issues and suppliers that may need assessment. And then lastly, you will then be able to collect the data if you do need it for disclosures. I think kind of just to wrap up, I think we have to understand that all of this is something that will evolve over time with technology, with external shocks like we've seen with COVID-19. A supplier framework will always change and will always have to incrementally improve over time. But I think the constant in this is just continuous engagement and communication and awareness creation with your supply chain. That's it from me. Tamindri, back to you.
Thank you, Sonali, and thank you to all of the entire panel. While we are waiting a couple of more questions, we do have 2 questions that have been raised on the Q&A panel. I have a couple of questions to bring up to the panelists, and then we will move into the Q&A from our audience. One of the first questions I have is bringing up something that both Dilhan and Matt touched on, which was we are not, Friedman's theory of making profit is no longer the norm. And then Matt, you touched upon value creation and justifying the need for bringing up ethical sourcing, and you gave examples of Patagonia and a couple of other companies that do work on that. How important is it that smaller companies, forget the larger ones, how important is it that smaller companies have the resources to do that? And one of the biggest issues they would have, particularly SMEs, is actual resources, whether it be in terms of staffing or in terms of knowledge, in terms of access.
Should I go first? Is that okay? Sorry, I've been presumptuous. It's a very good question. I might not answer that question directly, but let me take startups, for example, because I'm still trying, for SMEs, I understand the constraints, the restrictions. Perhaps I can get into an answer to that in a minute. What is interesting is that you're looking at a lot of startup companies that are creating new foods, right? So let's take, and Helena would know this, there's the alternative protein sector, there's sort of plant-based foods, and there's, what's the other trend? Lab-grown meat, although that's not really commercially available yet. Let's just take those examples. You've got a lot of startup companies without any baggage or legacy from the past, right? And they've attracted an enormous amount of investment and capital from investors that are looking at things around how they want to disrupt the food and agri industry, how they want to have a return, but how they want to invest and back many of those small companies, those startup companies that have very different principles than perhaps some of the more traditional ones. Okay, and that's very fair to say. I represent them. I know how they're some of them are moving and some of them are a little bit slower. So that's interesting, the amount of capital that's been put into those companies, and to support them with that kind of purpose-driven organization. When it comes to SMEs, I completely understand how it's severe restrictions on how they go about reevaluating some of their supply chains, and there are a lot of people within those smaller, medium-sized enterprises that are double hatting and doing multiple roles. Perhaps one example I can give is from Singapore, where the government really recognized that. Singapore's a small country. Yes, it's 5.5 million people. And yet the Singapore government, through its Enterprise Singapore agency which supports SMEs is almost acts as like an extension of those companies, helping them with this drive on sustainability, helping them with investment, helping them with training, helping them to match make with major multinational companies to do mentorship programs. I don't know how successful that has been today. It's relatively new on the sustainability side, but that's one way that they approach it. Because I don't actually have an answer. Maybe Dilhan can help with how, you know, when an SME is severely constrained like that. I think that there is a lot of government support in Singapore that's actually helping those companies, and actually then helping them with their exports as well. But looking at how they can make their supply chains more sustainable.
If I can add to that, you know, I think one of the things that we can do as businesses with access to technology, knowledge, and resources is to also try, particularly for the micro and small entrepreneurs, to try to establish platforms where I believe in the case of Keel's, Sonali shared also how you can have sourcing platforms that can, in the case of their supermarkets, I guess, try to align towards to give market alignment, to therefore deliver a better return to the small and micro enterprises, but to also use the standards that are required of sustainability to try to kind of have a more practical give and take, because failing to do that simply imposes a very difficult market requirement for certain social and environmental standards without giving the producer or the micro entrepreneur the ability to control their selling price. So I think one of the ways is in which we could make a difference is by giving them better market access, but in the same way, mentoring them and helping them to achieve the standards and to excel. And you shared many implied on certain methods in which that could benefit small entrepreneurs. But I think the bottom line is we can, as a medium, in our case, or larger businesses in many that you explained, we simply cannot afford for the micro and the small entrepreneurs to be left out of this sustainability, because ultimately it's about moving the needle. It's not about posturing and saying, look, I did a great job. It's about moving the needle at a national and a global level. And we cannot do that without bringing them into a partnership. And so platforms is one way in which we find quite useful. Thanks, Savitri.
Thank you. The next question is for the two practitioners in that sense from companies. Elena and Sonali, one of the things both of you all spoke about is your collaboration, and especially collaboration down the supply chain, not only the immediate boundaries, but going to the second and third and fourth tiers. Sonali, if I may ask you first, what are some of the key challenges and also opportunities that you've seen in introducing ethical sourcing and transparency into your company in Sri Lanka?
Thamira, excuse me, I think my video I'm having a few challenges with that. So if you don't mind, I'll keep that off.
Thank you.
So I think with, sustainable supply chain, as with overall sustainability, I think the first thing that is a challenge is buy-in. Explaining the business case. I think while the bigger corporates, it's all very clear to everyone now, I think some of the smaller companies are yet to kind of understand the benefits that there are. So explaining that business case would be like the first challenge that we have to face, especially in a country like Sri Lanka. And then we have to think about the capability of that supply chain, of the smaller businesses, to introduce the measures. So as Dilhan said, we can't, it is a partnership and it is collaboration. You can't just impose requirements on them. You have to work with them. You have to meet their needs, give them the training, give them the awareness, and that will happen through, working very closely with your suppliers and building that relationship. And then you also do have this cultural context that is particular to, Asian countries in terms of, things like human rights. That's not, or forced labor, child labor. Those concepts are, I'm not going to say foreign, but, we're still educating a lot of smaller suppliers on that, especially when you're looking at, essentially, family-owned businesses, farmers, putting children who help out, and making the distinction about what is family helping versus what is child labor, making those distinctions clearer and being sensitive of the cultural context in Sri Lanka. And in terms of opportunities, just kind of making clear to businesses that being first movers, especially smaller businesses, that they can really set themselves apart, and that can be from something as simple as gaining a certification, and that would improve their reputation and marketability. So there is a lot of opportunity. I think the crux is really education.
Thanks, Sonali. I'm going to move on to Elena now. One of the things you mentioned was about traceability and the transparency of your supply chain. How do you guarantee this traceability to your consumers in order to give them responsible purchasing choices, Elena?
Yeah, thanks, Tamindri. I'm going to switch the camera off because I have some connection problems. So can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, perfect. I think that being fully traceable and transparent in the supply chain is key to monitor and implement sustainable fishing. This is something that we have very clear in BOLTON Food. Technology here is also very important to trust the origin of the products that our consumers buy in the supermarket. So I can give you some key issues here, some examples of how technology is helping BOLTON Food to trust and to give transparent information to the consumers. For example, our own vessels are registered, they are based on the Pacific Ocean, they are operating there, and all of them are registered on Transparent Sea, which is a platform owned by WWF, and where you can see the places where our vessels were fishing. So it's a really nice tool to avoid IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. All our vessels also, and all the product, all the tuna that we used for our Spanish brand Isabel is certified under a very new and a very pioneer fishing certification, which is called Tuna from Responsible Fishing, which is the only certification in the world auditing the social and labor rights of the crew under the ILO 188, which is the International Labour Organization Covenant for the Sea Workers. So, so I think this is very important. It's also the only certification in the world that guarantee that vessels have a satellite control system controlled by the flag state. So this is also a proof about how technology is helping us to give this the first step, how technology is helping us to make our supply chain more sustainable, and also how technology is helping us to give traceable and transparent information to our consumers. Also, our plants are ISO 22005 certified. So you know that is the international ISO for traceability. We were the first tuna company in the world to have this traceability certification, and we have extended to all the supply chain, not only in the processing plants. So all of these examples enable us to give our consumers through our web pages and also unpack all the transparent and all the information about the origin of the products that we offer them. I think that, as I said before, it's our responsibility as an industry to give transparent information to our consumers about the origin of the products that they are buying. Also, it's our responsibility to educate them and to let them know what's behind a can of tuna, because as I said before, this is one of the most complex and largest supply chain in the food sector. This is also part of our business, it's part of our social responsibility strategy, and it's also part of our ethical codes.
Thank you, Elena. I have a follow-up question that's open to the entire panel. For many years now, artificial intelligence, technology, Internet of Things, the use of data, all of these have been hailed as game changers for stronger supply chain, including ethical sourcing. Besides Elena, what has your experience, each of the different members, been, and what would you recommend for larger and smaller organizations on either introducing ethical sourcing or enhancing ethical sourcing in your respective organizations and from your different perspectives?
Okay, we are, I think, all a little bit shy, so maybe if I can start and then perhaps others. You know, the thing is, in response to that question, the cost of technology has reduced. You have a proliferation of app and other developers that are enabled to provide the validation that a consumer needs to address some of the concerns and opportunities that Matt and Helena highlighted through certain standards, through certain regulatory compliance and so on. A consumer needs evidence, needs a visible validation. And so integrating QR, integrating different sort of devices makes the product marketable, because otherwise you have whether it's a fish or a pack of tea, it may be incredibly sustainable, but if you're unable to communicate that to the consumer, it becomes unrealizable benefit to the producer. So the producer has to benefit, because ultimately sustainability and the commercial interests of every company are aligned, but to align it, it has to be communicated to the buyer. So my perspective on that would be that technology gives us incredible ability to, with absolute certainty, communicate whatever good that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Totally agree with that. And I also think that we must educate consumers in the meaning of sustainability, because during the last years we are used to listen about environmental things, environmental issues, environmental protection, at least in Europe. And I feel that sometimes we lose this part of the social sustainability. So I used to say that in our sector, you can buy a very sustainable tuna from the environmental point of view, which has been caught by a fisherman with not with no very respect for the human rights. So so please educate and communicate consumers that sustainability is economic, is social, and is environmental, and that also we need partners to verify that the industry is doing it in the right way. Because I can say to my consumers, I do it in a very right way because it's Bolton Foods statement. But we think to partner. We need to partner with NGOs, with the scientists, scope, in order to give evidence, as you said. We need to give evidence of this transparent information that the consumers must need.
Matt and Sonali, do you have anything else you'd like to? Sonali?
Yeah, I think, I mean, just on the flip side of that, in terms of what Dilhan was mentioning, in a proliferation of apps and communication methods on the other side of that, with you know, just basic technology in terms of social media, video phones, all of that has had a significant impact on businesses in terms of it's very easy for something to go viral if one of your supply chain partners has done something that is considered unsustainable and can very easily flip back and hit your company. So it's just, I think, raised the awareness and has necessitated raising the bar in terms of company and their sustainability practices.
Thanks. I'm now going to move on to the Q&A, the questions that are on the Q&A panel. Anuka, please respond and let me know if the earlier segment we had in terms of supporting smaller businesses and mentoring them was sufficient, or if you would like a further answer. I'd like to move on to the question raised by Makoto. He talks about, I think there's one that's been answered. I go on to Amjad Azmir. Consumers in many cases need to pay a premium for ethically sourced products. What can be done to reduce this premium by businesses or organizations like Food Industry Asia?
Okay, so very quickly, well, I'll be brutally honest. We're not that type of organization, and that's a market mechanism. Companies define, the prices and what consumers are willing to pay. What I would say though is when it comes to ethically sourced products, I'm not an expert in all the pricing, so I'll just assume what you're saying is that maybe they are at a premium. I think eventually what you'll see is you always have this premium segment, and then when everyone else sort of moves in that direction, then you can see those prices drop, and that's just the normal market mechanism, really.
If I can add to that, I think you're absolutely spot on, Matt, but equally there is a concept of true pricing, and where in certain cases a product might have been might be discounted in terms of externalizing certain environmental or other aspects. So certainly, when you have when you take the cost to the environment, and when you pay, for example, living wage, etc., you will invariably have an impact on the product. It doesn't mean that the company is profiting, but that concept of true pricing is there, because over the past 10 years, you have a discount culture that is fueled unsustainable low pricing. So for some companies to survive, they have simply had to compromise, and now is the time for change. So hopefully that is the transformation that we are on the cusp of.
Thank you for correcting me as well. Yeah.
I've got a question again from Amjad. What actions can companies take to create a closed loop supply chain where their end products are reutilized? Does good sourcing of raw materials or transparency help in this regard? Would any of you like to take that question?
I can try to answer that. Maybe I'll give I just wrote something down. Maybe I can give the example of plastics, because I think someone else tried to ask a question about that. So an example would be transparency would be very important in that. So for example, in plastics and packaging, what needs to happen is there needs to be less virgin plastics being produced, quite frankly. Okay, the problem is that they're very cheap to produce, right? And so there's a problem, and so at the moment it's a little bit more expensive to process and collect and then recycle those things. I think the Danone in Indonesia has created a 100% recyclable bottle that could be recycled again. Although there are some elements around food contact material regulation that needs to come into place because of contamination and things, but put that aside. So that transparency in finding out what type of raw material that will be, is it virgin or is it recycled, is absolutely critical to make sure that we're not putting virgin plastic into pretending that it's recycled plastic. So in that respect, yes, perhaps that helps to answer it. The transparency element in that is absolutely fundamentally important to make sure that we're doing what we're saying in terms of being sustainable and trying to get that kind of plastic back in and creating a closed loop or a circular economy.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to Roseanne Richardo. The question to Sonali was, how do you support the progress and improvement of your suppliers? And did you ever modify your code of conduct as per new challenges and issues? And in brackets, it says materiality study.
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, we do, it's continuous engagement with our suppliers in terms of we do provide trainings, say our leisure inbound, especially after, with COVID, they've taken that opportunity to look at health and safety trainings. So that will really depend on the different sectors and the different set of suppliers that they're working with. In terms of changing our supplier code of conduct, actually we did a change just in the last couple of diversity and inclusion focus. And that's something that we're working quite closely on, and that resulted in a change to our supplier code of conduct with, much more focused clauses now included. And that's also then now been incorporated into our supplier management framework. Our registration has questions on gender and diversity, positions of our suppliers, and any policies or practices that they themselves practice. And we've just started to send out a newsletter to our suppliers in terms of just informing them of what our new focus areas are, keeping them up to date, and hopefully that they can take those issues on board.
Thanks, Sonali. I've got a question from Rathika, which I'd like to actually open up to the entire panel. He says, interesting to hear of John Keel's process automation through technology for ethical sourcing. Securing trust and credibility between vendors and companies are still key factors in ethical sourcing, with vendors becoming increasingly conscious on the selection processes and transparency of the same. How has a company's automation of the process helped to enhance the trust and credibility in the selection process between vendors and the company?
Their own operations. Speaking from John Keel's perspective, it's just the setup of the system has allowed it to be very clear in terms of how bids are evaluated. It's online auction. So the open way of doing the whole sourcing process, and that I think has really helped us with suppliers understanding why and how our selection process goes the way it does.
Does anyone else have any insight?
Matt, I'm sure you have something to say on the topic. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I would love to hear your perspective on that, on the potential for automating this process and sort of delivering benefit.
Honestly, I could try. Really, this is a really good question, and I don't know the answer to, quite frankly. Let me just take the bit on securing trust and credibility, perhaps first. Yeah, I mean, building confidence and trust is of critical importance, and that can be eroded quite quickly. And in fact, actually, I think at FIA, forgive me, I'm not the expert on this, is one of my colleagues. We actually undertook a study and working with trying to understand the relationship between regulators and private sector, and there you can see there's not a lot of trust sometimes, and we looked at what were the mechanisms that we could find to try and help build that credibility and trust. So I would say that is a fundamentally important area. In terms of the actual automation of processes, honestly, I'm not so sure. I wonder if someone else, even on the audience, would have an answer for that. So forgive me for that. I need to have a bit of a think about that question. It was a really, really good one.
That's fine. Have a think, Matt. I'll move on to the next question until then. Mariam brings up a question: would collusion and collaboration between competitors assist in bringing down the cost of raw materials, resources, and also push for more sustainable and ethical methods of sourcing? For example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi working together to procure sugar more sustainly.
Okay, I'll take that one. I'll take that one very quickly. Look, when you're talking about collusion, that's antitrust. That's illegal. When you get companies that come together to do something like that, that's not something that's that is appropriate either. And having major competitors doing something like that, it presents a lot of legal issues. I understand where the question's coming from, though. You know, the power of big corporations to try and make things more sustainable. I would turn that back to you and also say, just be careful with that thought process, because big companies getting together, what would that necessarily mean then for the suppliers, for the farmers as well? And so it's not just simply thinking about this in terms of sustainability, but also, you know, understanding the needs of farmers and giving them a fair price as well. And perhaps I'll leave it there.
If I can add to that, we have experienced this, and I think in response to that question, one of the I can use it as an example. There was collaboration. I won't use that word collusion, but collaboration amongst several European retailers in negotiation with suppliers. And ultimately, this was dressed up as a collaboration for the greater good to deliver benefit to consumers and deliver benefit to suppliers. But ultimately, it became a much tougher negotiation where, as suppliers, we suffered from the retailers saying, okay, now we are bigger, we can buy this, and we would like 30% lower price. So it wasn't really about sustainability. I mean, it was in the sense that you still had to tick the boxes on sustainability, but then you had to go into another room and suffer the assault of a buying group that actually didn't care much about anything other than price. So, I mean, that's, of course, it can work beautifully in a perfect world, but it can also go badly wrong, exactly as you said, Matt.
Elena, did you have anything to add? Right, we're nearly out of time, and I apologize, we're not going to be able to get to the final few questions in the Q&A, but I do have one final question which we haven't really touched on, and that's in terms of something Matt brought up. He talked about purpose and the verve and the fervor behind teenage girls. How do you convert those people, those young people who are also consumers, not only talent, into working with both within your organizations as well as being part of your supply chain? What is the role of youth, the young people, and managing their future and their ambitions in bringing them into the sustainable supply chain sort of loop?
I can start if you want. I think that we are going through a terrible era today. And I think if we have learned something from this crisis and this pandemic is that we are extremely vulnerable. And this is something that our kids and our young people is suffering also. So I think that we are more aware than ever, and we have to take care of ourselves, of course, but we have to take care also of the planet. It's very important to explore key challenges and opportunities for introducing ethical sources practices. I think that initiatives like the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs make more sense than ever. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have an extremely good international agenda and goals that we have to achieve, yes or yes. And I think that we are very lucky because young people are very aware of this. I have 3 kids, and I can see it everywhere. So I'm really proud of it. But within all this disaster, as I was saying, we are more aware than ever of the importance also of solidarity. And this is also a big opportunity to sustainability. So I think that we have to push sustainability practice. We have to educate consumers. We have to communicate. There's no way to do it. We need the retail because in the food sector, the retail is very important. And at least here in the south of Europe, we are struggling with the retail because, of course, sustainable food means more expensive food. And you know that when money is among a negotiation, it's difficult to convince people. But we have to push for it because we know that people is very, the intention for people want, they don't mind to pay more cents, euros for sustainable food. So we have to keep on pushing. I think that at millennials or centennials or these young people that are pushing a lot are key in sustainable practice. And so I just want to say that we have to keep on moving, to keep on communicating. The communication is very important. Events like this are very important, Dimitri, so I'm very happy to be here. And we will continue this because, as I said before, this is our responsibility also as a business. Of course, we need profit, and we have to take in mind also the economic aspect of our business. But if we don't do it in a responsible way, we are not going to survive. So we have to keep on pushing in this way.
Sure. Anyone else?
Just very quickly, maybe I'll pose a question. So I did read, I don't know, I forget where I read it, whether The Economist or something else, where there's a generation of younger people that could be worse off than their parents. Okay. And to me, what would that mean? We don't want that. I've got children too, of course not. No, but what if that is the case? Then I just pose the question, what would be then what would then be their purpose if they know they're going to be worse off, and perhaps what that could mean is that you could see an even more stronger, more aggressive social movement towards corporations more with purpose rather than just purely for profit. So you might see real acceleration of that. I'm speculating. It was just something that I read what was very interesting, where, and honestly, right now, no one knows what's going to happen in a couple of years' time, even a year's time, given what happened last year with COVID-19. So when it comes to young people and in the supply chain, I think, you know what, I think this is just going to, it could potentially accelerate even more, and there'll be even more demands from a younger generation of people who are saying, you know, we want more performance-driven organizations. We want to be a part of that. And I know for a fact that many multinational companies, and the big ones, the biggest, Nestle's, the Unilevers of this world, you know, the way that they go around attracting talent now is very much geared towards that, and especially young people as well. Okay, so I'll probably just leave it there.
Thank you. I wanted to sum up our conversation, and it has been a nice range of ideas and thoughts, and also from your different perspectives. I think it has really enriched the conversation. So instead of going into a lot of words, I want to pick up a few words that really came up, starting with collaboration, with education, with true pricing, mentoring, giving people access, credibility and trust, data and automation, traceability, performance-driven organizations, communication, keeping going on, and also this purpose. It's been a wonderful, wonderful panel. I'm really grateful for all four of you. Thank you, Elena, Sonali, Matt, and Dilhan. This is Tamindri De Silva saying thank you for the 47 participants who've remained with us till the end of this conversation. See you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very
Good night.
much.
Nice to see you.